This is the story of how one country's passion has mirrored its modern history. That passion is aviation, and the country is Bahrain.
Bahrain has always been progressive in its thinking ahead. They've always been called the Switzerland of the Middle East.
Concorde was all about prestige, and that was the difference that it made for Bahrain. It sent that message very clearly out to say this is the place.
Bahrain at that time was controlling around 1.5 million square mile of airspace.
This aviation adventure has unfolded over the last 100 years. And with each new milestone, Bahrain has undergone one more rite of passage in its national story. Today, Bahrain's aerospace industry goes from strength to strength, with new developments at the national airline, the international airport, and in pilot training programs. This ongoing success comes as no surprise, because among all the Gulf nations, Bahrain has by far the deepest roots in aviation, stretching back to just a few years after the Wright brothers first took wing. Bahrain's first aviator took flight in the early part of the 20th century.
Recently, there has been a picture that has been found of my great-great-uncle Sheikh Abdullah bin Isa at Hendon in 1919, where he was the first Bahraini to take a flight. So we can see that the interest has been there for many a generation.
Back in Bahrain in 1920, a year after that first flight, permission was granted to establish an airfield, and a desert location outside Manama was marked out. On Sunday, the 8th of June 1924, 3 RAF de Havilland DH-9A fighter bombers set out from Basra for Bahrain. According to squadron leader Richard Peck, the machines approached Manama in good formation at 5,000 feet and glided down to the aerodrome and landed. The next morning, the deputy ruler, His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Isa, became the first ever Bahraini to see the island from above.
I think we have to have a lot of respect for the Sheikh, because we're talking 1924, there were very few aircraft even in Britain, never mind in the Middle East. And this was the first experience of an aircraft like this appearing in Bahrain.
Squadron leader Peck reported that Sheikh Hamad took the liveliest interest and certainly managed to recognize a good deal.
He was apparently at first slightly nervous, as one might expect, but later was overjoyed with the experience. And then when he came back in this beautiful old de Havilland 9, he gathered all the senior rulers together and the senior members of his family and others, and obviously relayed the stories with great glee. It must have been a wonderful experience.
Bahrain's idyllic landscape inspired one British visitor of the 1920s to describe it as a pleasant oasis. The golden-dusted roads are shaded by long forests of date palms, deepening into an impenetrable greenness, cool with the sound of wind among the great leaves and the tinkle of flowing water. Meanwhile, Bahrain was looking increasingly attractive as the British negotiated air routes to link London with New Delhi and Sydney.
The preferred route really was through Iran. That was a more direct route, and it could have been operated much more efficiently through Iran, Iraq and Pakistan. The problem was the Iranians, even then, blew hot and cold with us.
When Tehran announced that Imperial Airways must switch to a route that would cross mountains, swamps, deserts, and even a jungle with tigers in it, an alternative along the south side of the Gulf was chosen. And Bahrain found herself on the Imperial Air Route map for the first time. The aircraft that would fly the new London-Bahrain-Karachi service were Imperial Airways' giant Handley Page HP-42s, based at Croydon Airport outside London.
Well, the HP-42 was really the Queen Mary of the skies. It was a beautiful, luxurious aircraft, wingspan of 130 feet, which was then the largest wingspan in the world. 4 engines, which gave a great feeling of confidence for its passengers. A beautiful, graceful, very stable aircraft.
The HP-42 was notoriously slow and was regularly overtaken by trains travelling the same routes below. They could be a handful in turbulence. One pilot described it as grueling manual work. You wore gloves, took off your tunic, loosened your shirt and tie. When you'd come through it, you felt as though you'd just rode the boat race. For the passengers, it was an adventure, but a largely comfortable one.
We have to remember that this was an aircraft that had to overfly large expanses of very hostile desert. It had to be luxurious. The armchairs were covered with chintz. There were flowers on the table in front of every passenger. This was really like flying in an ocean liner.
On the 6th of October 1932, Bahrain's historic debut as an international airline destination started unpromisingly when the first HP-42 landed and promptly sank up to her axles in soft sand.
The captain put on full power but only dug it in even further and saw that there was no way he was going to get that aircraft off again. So the Sheikh rallied the people and they all got together and pulled this enormous aircraft backwards out of where it had become stuck. And then the pilot was able to take off and actually land at Muharraq. And from then on, Muharraq became the site of Imperial Airways flight operations.
In those early days, Muharraq's facilities were basic. Most of the passengers were only in transit, but the regular stream of Imperial Airways traffic encouraged the aerodrome to develop its support systems.
Very small airport, very small airport at that time. When the plane landed, they have a bell to ring, big large bell outside, they ring it, so all the passenger goes to the aircraft.
4 bells meant an aircraft was approaching, 6 that it was ready to depart. Muharraq's terminal was a simple barasti thatched palm shack, even then with duty-free shopping opportunities. Passengers were weighed on departure, because the 100-kilogram personal allowance included the customer's own body weight. With Muharraq now established as Bahrain's airport, the arrival of the Imperial Airways aircraft became a regular, but still miraculous sight.
It's a miracle, you know. Still, you can't understand it, but it's a miracle. People, well, they were very surprised to see this big bird going up and down. But at last, at the end, they discovered this is an aircraft.
Flight was a miracle in those days, even for people living in Britain. Those who flew were a very, very tiny minority. The ordinary people had never experienced anything like it. And to have this aircraft land in that particular corner of the Middle East, the tiny corner of the Middle East, gave Bahrain enormous importance, which indeed it's never actually lost in terms of air transport.
For Bahrainis and expats alike, the world had changed. They were within a few days of London instead of 5 weeks. They were, in the words of one resident, in the world instead of out of it. Bahrain's arrival on the international stage coincided with a momentous discovery. Oil was found on the island in June 1932, the first strike anywhere in the Gulf, and the beginning of a new era of the region's history. Oil brought more international visitors, serviced by Imperial Airways flying boats.
I flew that one. When I first went to London, I went on that aircraft. It takes 3 days to fly from Bahrain to London. You sleep 2 nights. But you know, I always wonder how this big machine goes up in the air.
It's June 1936, and recently arrived in London on the Imperial Airways flight, His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa is guest of honor at the Hendon Air Show. Sheikh Hamad witnesses the first ever public outing of a brand new aircraft, the Supermarine Spitfire.
1936 was a very crucial period in preparing for what was the impending war. I think we have to credit our leaders with considerable foresight in this, and they wanted to tie down a strong relationship with Bahrain, which was already starting to produce considerable quantities of oil, which were going to be very, very important to Britain during the Second World War and subsequently.
Hostilities must have seemed far removed from Bahrain when the Second World War first broke out in Europe. But the island was keen to demonstrate its close alliance with Great Britain. On behalf of the Bahraini people, the ruling family presented the British with the first of several donations for the war effort. The money was used to buy Spitfires, and the first of these was flown by Flight Lieutenant Scott Maldon.
The very courageous young pilot who actually shot down 2 Messerschmitts over France with the first one and claimed the third. The support in the Bahraini population for Britain was such that they went on raising money throughout the war, and ultimately there were a total of 6 Spitfires bought for the RAF, and they served successfully throughout the war.
Back in Bahrain, the relative calm was about to be shattered. The Bapco refinery at Awali was an important supplier for the Royal Navy, and therefore a tempting target. In October 1940, the Italians decided to destroy it. The mission was masterminded by Major Ettore Muti, one of Mussolini's most rabid followers. He dispatched 3 Savoia Macchetti bombers from the Mediterranean on the daring 4,500-kilometer mission. Flying at night and aiming for the refinery's flare stacks, they dropped 87 bombs. The next day, the Italian broadcasting service claimed that Bahrain had been destroyed. But the reality was rather different.
Thanks to a bit of luck on the part of the British, some flares were misplaced and the Italians bombed the wrong bit of the island. But had they been successful, the result would have been absolutely devastating.
In the immediate post-war period, Bahrain, and especially Manama, was developing fast, an indication of things to come in the Gulf region.
So everything was really focused on Bahrain. Even I remember when I used to go to Oman to cover my duty there, if you want to speak to London, you had to go through Bahrain. Bahrain, please connect me with London. These are the golden days that Bahrain really enjoyed. And not only Bahrain enjoyed, but the modernization really started there. I'm not playing music to my ears for Bahrain, but it's a fact.
In 1949, this island of opportunity welcomed an RAF pilot called Freddie Bosworth, who arrived in his 7-seat fabric-covered Anson Mark I. His first business partner was Hussein Yatim.
He looked like any Englishman, and he was very nice. And he always came to try to borrow money to buy parts from Aramco for his airplane. And he was always short of something. And so we helped him with the money.
Bosworth and Yatim's enterprise became Gulf Aviation, a tiny airline flying between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, a faster and more convenient connection than the unreliable Dow services. Their office was in Bab al-Bahrain.
We have one aircraft, and in this office down below here, I was the salesman, his wife was the cashier, and he's the captain who fly the plane. Well, the plane didn't have any seats, so I suggested if they took one of the toilets, they would have more seats. And thus it works very well. Because the distance was so short, you didn't require a toilet.
Freddie Bosworth's career was short-lived because he died in 1950 while training on a new aircraft back in England. But there was no stopping his fledgling airline, now owned by a Bahraini consortium, and the British company BOAC.
Gulf Aviation really was actually the heart and soul of the oil industry in the Middle East at that stage. You had sort of aerial cowboys who'd go out into the backwoods of Oman and places like that and land on airships that they themselves created. It was a phenomenal, courageous effort which they undertook to develop the industry, to find oil sources, to locate oils and oil wells and set them up. Everybody in the modern world owes a great debt to these people and the courageous flying that they undertook at that time.
One night in June 1950, an Air France DC-4 that had originated in Saigon, Vietnam, was approaching Bahrain.
Came into Maharik and was making final approach, which would have meant wheels down, flaps down, had actually called the control tower and said, I'm on finals. And then nothing. It subsequently transpired that he'd hit the water with his wheels down and obviously cartwheeled.
Out of 51 passengers and crew, there were 6 survivors. But almost unbelievably, there was a second disaster to come.
Now, 24 hours later, another Air France DC-4 flying the same route, and tragically, they did exactly the same thing at more or less the same time. Finals, flaps down, wheels down, hit the water, cartwheeled. It was relatively unbelievable.
This time, 13 survivors and 38 dead were pulled from the sea. Bahrain was in shock.
Well, this was an extraordinary pair of accidents which happened within 2 days of each other. Both Air France aircraft, both DC-4s. The DC-4 was a well-tried passenger aircraft which had served all the way through the war and mechanically was absolutely superb. Both were put down to pilot error, but it's all too easy to blame the pilot.
I saw on the accident reports that the pilots were blamed for not maintaining height, but I think they were doing visual circuits like we all did. But all of a sudden, the visual references went funny on you, strange, and you thought you were higher than you were. And they just went into the water, both of them, in 2 days apart.
Fortunately, the Air France disasters were isolated incidents. All through the 1950s, Bahrain's aviation success mirrored that of the country itself.
Bahrain was in the 20th century. It was civilized and it was tolerant. Sharjah didn't have, or Dubai didn't have one yard of tarmac roads at that time. Bahrain was totally stable and it also was well established. The Bahrain air traffic and the airport was as good as anyone in Europe. There were a super bunch of people running it, and it was also had the advantage of being in the geographical perfect position as a refueling point.
Today, the international airport at Muharraq welcomes airlines from all over the world. And even as far back as 1951, European and American carriers such as BOAC, Pan Am and Air France were all represented here. But in the 50s and 60s, Muharraq's busiest operator was the British Royal Air Force, who built this hangar and many of the older buildings now used for support services. RAF pilot John James was stationed here in the late 50s.
This was taken at Muharraq on the airfield. They've got a go-kart club going, and this was taken over, it was Christmas actually, it looks like. And this was just over by the RAF dispersal. Decided to have a Grand Prix in Bahrain. So this perhaps was the first Bahrain Grand Prix.
Most RAF missions out of Muharraq at this time were in rugged twin Pioneers, supporting British operations further south.
The main job for 152 was actually supporting the ground troops down in Muscat and Oman. It was a small station commanded by a wing commander, and I would guess there were no more than 100, 150 personnel. And it was a very, very relaxed setup.
In 1959, His Highness Sheikh Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa laid the foundation for Muharraq's new terminal. Two years later, and just 2 days after his accession, His Highness Sheikh Isa bin Salman declared the new facility open. another milestone in Bahrain's leadership of the Gulf region.
While a lot of the Gulf states were still looking at almost wooden shacks as terminals and sand runways, if you flew onto anywhere else in the Gulf, you'd often end up staying on the aeroplane because there was nothing else to get out to, just blowing sand around in a shack. So Bahrain made a big difference there. That was a big statement about Bahrain's importance to the Gulf at that time.
The Manama skyline has changed considerably over the last 6 decades. But these police helicopters are directly descended from the establishment of a police aviation wing in the mid-60s.
Well, in the earlier days, they thought of having an air wing, and that was in 1965 when they deployed the first helicopter, which called the Scout, and it's British made.
The police wing's early role in surveillance, search and rescue and civil security has evolved over time, using a variety of different aircraft from the early Hughes models and onto a series of Bell 412s. In the early days, the wing enjoyed the strong support of His Highness Sheikh Isa bin Salman, and more recently, His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa.
I think we are lucky and fortunate to have His Majesty supporting the police aviation, and that's why we have the expansion of the police aviation and with all the latest aircraft.
Back in the 60s, Muharraq Airport was a busy place, with heads of state and business leaders shuttling in from around the world, and cementing the island's reputation as a friendly, progressive business centre. Meanwhile, Britain's momentous decision to withdraw all of her forces from east of Suez led to Bahrain's admittance to the UN in 1971.
I have the honor on this august occasion to extend the heartfelt thanks of the government and the people of Bahrain to all members of the Security Council who have approved the application of the state of Bahrain for admission to the United Nations.
Back at home, His Highness Sheikh Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa was inaugurating another new terminal at Muharraq, with air bridges and stands suitable for Boeing 747 jumbos. The newly extended runway now stretched for a massive 3,800 meters. Since Imperial Airways first landed on the island, Bahrainis had embraced the idea of international flight. But the possibility of actually becoming a pilot was still a dream.
I always wanted to be a pilot, and I dreamed to be a pilot. That was from my childhood, to the extent that I joined the United States Air Force.
In the late 1960s, it was almost impossible for a Bahraini to become a pilot at all, and especially for Gulf aviation, which was still 51% British-owned.
I went to see the general manager at the time, called Mr. Alan Bodger, and he said, no, I think it's difficult and it's something that you Bahrainis are incapable of doing. I took that as a challenge and I didn't accept it, that we are incapable. So I went to see, at that time, Mr. Mohammed Kanu, who was the chairman of the company in Bahrain.
With Mr. Kanu's support, Abdul Rahman Al Gaoud did eventually succeed in becoming an airline captain. In 1974, as he graduated as a pilot, big changes were underway at Gulf Aviation. The airline, now renamed Gulf Air, became the new national carrier for Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Oman.
After the four countries took over Gulf Air, and they wanted to have a unique airline, and I think they did. The airline thought of replacing the VC-10, so they looked around and the TriStar was chosen.
The most luxurious airliner the world has ever known, a setting for luxury undreamed of by earlier generations of travelers.
It was a beautiful airplane, and I still really love that airplane because I flew so many hours on that airplane. But the unique of it was the interior of the airplane, and of course goes with it the service that Gulf Air wanted to provide for its customers.
The so-called five-star TriStars arrived at the right moment, providing unprecedented levels of flying comfort at a time when the Gulf was enjoying the benefits of massively increased oil prices. Meanwhile, Jamil Wafa was helping to develop Muharraq as a modern center in the heart of the Gulf.
When I started my travel agency in 1974, I brought France to Bahrain, a UTA French airline. I had a lot of opposition because people did not want to see except BOC and Qantas. They didn't want to see any other carrier. But to me, my role was to develop the Bahrain airport. I mean, aviation is in my blood.
Over the years, the travel agencies of the Kanu brothers and Jamil Wafa were important in maintaining Bahrain as an international hub. In August 1974, Muharraq was in the spotlight again, when it welcomed another hugely popular visitor for the first time.
Yes, of course, that was something nobody would like to miss. It's not was me only, the whole country came to the airport to see the Concorde because it was a leap jump in the aviation to go to supersonic and flying twice the speed of sound. The airplane was, I think, way ahead of itself, and I think the design of it was fantastic.
Everywhere Concorde has gone, it has proved it can do the job it was designed to do. It cuts existing long-distance flight times in two. Singapore, Bahrain, 3 hours 40 instead of 7 hours 35.
I can remember taking the flight and how astonishingly wonderful it was to do the flight from London to Bahrain in 3 hours. It was marvellous, and I think it gave us all of us a great buzz when you saw the aircraft coming in or going out. And it meant a lot for the people in Bahrain as well who would go out and watch it. The difference it made for me was that people back in Europe who would go, "Where are you?" They'd never really heard of Bahrain, they didn't understand the Gulf. But once Concorde went there, it was a statement that said it must be an important place to go to. It must be a safe place, a nice place for Concorde to be there.
Concorde continued to fly into Bahrain throughout the late 70s, at one time in a British Airways partnership with Singapore Airlines.
So they painted one side Singapore Airlines and another side British Airways. And I had a VIP passengers group traveling on it. I took the group. The lady concerned told me, "I want to sit on the British Airways side. I don't want to sit on the Singapore Airlines side." I promise you.
By the early 1980s, 50 years after those first flights had touched down in Muharraq, aviation has become an inescapable part of modern life.
The necessity to have an open airway with the world to export or import or travel and have visitors come and see you. So it's an important element of everybody's life.
Away from the civilian sector, the Royal Bahraini Air Force was established by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa. Having qualified as a pilot in the early 1970s, His Majesty's lifelong passion for flying led to the formation of the Air Force, when Bahrain's first military helicopters were delivered in 1977.
At that time, we have introduced one squadron of helicopter, the BO-105 helicopter built by a German company. And that was just to initiate the start of the Air Force at that time for the role of minimum capabilities of lifting, transporting personnel to various islands and for surveillance. And it was the first step to start an Air Force.
Since those early days, the helicopter wing has grown rapidly. First with the addition of 3 squadrons of 212s as robust aerial workhorses.
As you are aware, Bahrain is an island, and when you are surrounded by water, you always need helicopters. They work in every field and everything. What we are lacking with the 212s was the role of an attack helicopter, of a designated attack helicopter. And the Cobras have really fulfilled this role.
The helicopter wing at Rafah retains 2 squadrons of Cobras, an agile force well suited for patrolling Bahrain's long coastal boundaries. On the southeastern coast of the island, Isa Air Base is home to the Royal Bahraini Air Force fixed-wing aircraft, including the older Northrop F-5s and 2 squadrons of up-to-the-minute F-16 Block 40s. The guidance and enduring support of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa is keenly felt at Isa Base.
Yes, His Majesty the King is the godfather of the Air Force, of the Bahraini Air Force, and he had a very special interest for the Air Force, and all what we have now established is under his vision and his ideas. He come and visit us a lot. He come and direct us a lot, and he's very close to the Royal Bahraini Air Force.
Last thing he had presented to the Air Force was the training school, academy, if you will, by providing the Air Force with the Firefly basic trainer aircraft and also the Hawk 129, the advanced and latest of the Hawk family. And this will be the flying academy in the island that will allow us to train pilots right from the beginning all the way to the F-16.
The sophisticated flight simulator at Isa allows new pilots to get used to the Hawk's digital controls, preparing them to transfer to the real aircraft. The Hawk is just one more step towards the would-be fighter pilot's ultimate goal, the F-16.
The F-16 multi-role aircraft is one of the best fighter aircraft in the world right now. That tells you how capable we are. In air defense role, we are very high capable with the best air-to-air missiles that can be carried on the F-16. But our role is really to defend the skies and sovereignty of the Kingdom of Bahrain.
That role came to the fore when the first batch of Bahraini F-16s arrived on the island in 1990, just 3 months before Iraq's invasion of Kuwait.
We were able to participate with the coalition for strike missions on the Kuwaiti theater. And also we joined the US forces as an air defense escort using the F-16. So after only 3 months, we were able, with the high capable Bahraini pilots, to play a part in the liberation of the Kuwait.
Today, the Royal Bahraini Air Force enjoys excellent cooperation with its allies in the region. Regularly conducting joint interoperational exercises. Firm foundations are in place for the force's future development.
We have completed the circle of the Air Force assets. So I can see in the near future that we are doing a lot of modernization and modification to our Air Force. And thanks to our superiors, our leaders, who are providing us with this opportunity. We are very proud. Having this size of Air Force, one can be very proud.
Back in the civil sector, and 8 decades after the first intrepid passengers arrived here, Bahrain's international airport continues to welcome the world.
What we are proud of is that our airport has always been built and managed around passengers, not around airplanes. So the convenience that a passenger gets by traveling through Bahrain airport, I think it's unique in the region.
Bahrain has always been progressive in its thinking ahead. They've always been called the Switzerland of the Middle East. So they need an airport, they need to expand the airport, there's demand for their airport, so that's part of their expansion for the future.
Foxtrot 102, Bahrain tower surface, wind at 090 degrees, 7 knots, speed takeoff, runway 3.
Behind the scenes, Bahrain remains one of the busiest aviation hubs in the entire Middle East.
Remember that today we are having around 1,400 movement a week at Bahrain International Airport. Very big movement. That's only what you see on the ground. Above us, there is 2,300 flights moving every day, every 24 hours, which is controlled by Bahrain Center. The area which Bahrain Center covers is 450,000 square kilometers. So it's a huge responsibility that Bahrain has on its shoulder within the civil aviation authorities.
Because we're traveling out in that direction at a true airspeed of 500 knots, but we have...
In the future, that responsibility will be shouldered by some of these students from the Gulf Aviation Academy, now completing their studies in the UK.
450 knots.
We've started an initiative last year with Bahrain government to train 100 Bahraini pilots for the market. So it's good for Bahrain, it's good for the aviation sectors and the aviation airlines, and it's good for the individual cadets.
I am extremely proud to be a part of this first batch. Not only have I been selected, but I am the first and only female in this batch. So this is a great honor for myself.
Here again, and we can see from underneath.
But I'm also setting like a hope for the female Bahrainis that they can make it into this industry.
Back at home, Bahrain continues to blaze the trail as an aerospace leader in the Gulf region. The Bahrain International Air Show, conceived by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa, is the perfect 21st century showcase.
The attendance at the Bahrain International Air Show was of a very high level. The companies who supported the air show, the companies who attended the air show, are the biggest companies in aviation today. The experience that they had, a very business-to-business event. So it was a huge success to see them being able to interact due to the close proximity of everybody.
Looking ahead, Bahrain's biannual air show will continue to underline the kingdom's enthusiasm for all things aerospace.
It's very important for us because it gives us an opportunity to interact with all of the different technology providers. It increases the scope of our connectivity with the world. It puts us on the map in a manner that only an air show can do.
And so the first chapters of Bahrain's aviation history draw to a close. The national passion for flying began almost a century ago, and each new rite of passage has brought new inspiration and new opportunities. As new generations emerge and are guided into the future, there is no doubt that the Kingdom of Bahrain's aviation story will continue to mirror the success of this proud island nation.